Well, let me begin by thanking the co-hosts of this event, the national setting of the United Church of Christ, the UCC's Council of Climate Justice, Mayflower UCC, and the Minnesota Conference of the United Church of Christ. I am so proud of our denomination's decades-long witness on behalf of God's glorious gift of creation. The UCC first sounded its concern for what was then called conservation at the General Synod in 1959. Since then, the United Church of Christ has been a leading religious voice in protecting our common home, in naming environmental racism, and calling out environmental injustice and climate injustice in all of its forms. I'm honored to stand before you today at this inaugural annual Earth Day Summit. This event is a testimony to the decades of work and witness by UCC leaders like Dr. Ben Chavez, like Dolly Burwell, the Reverend Peter Sawtell, the Reverend Megan Pritchard, the Reverend Dr. Brooks Burnt, and the Reverend Michael Malcolm. And thanks to the two of you for hosting this event. It's really been so moving thus far. I also want to thank the countless clergy and congregations committed to restoring God's creation. Now I want to offer you an overview of this presentation. Since the focus of this first UCC Earth Day Summit is stories of hope, I want to begin by asking, what's the story? What's the story we're living in? Then I want to offer an understanding of the kind of hope I believe people of faith are called to embrace, living as we are amidst the sixth great extinction. Finally, I will try to give some shape to the new hope-filled story God is calling us to live into. So what's the story? What's the story we're living in? For the better part of 12,000 years, life on Earth has enjoyed a stable climate. That stable climate allowed humans to stop migrating and settle down, to grow food, to build cities and infrastructure, to institute laws, to claim territories, and to allow for some free time. In other words, the stable climate, or what I like to call the continuity of God's creation, allowed us to create civilization. But that continuity is now broken. Once the industrial era began, it took us only 7 generations to decreate the planet. Over the past 200 years, humanity has extracted and burned about half the coal, oil, and gas that nature took 150 million years to create. That's how the developed countries built the modern world. In doing so, a tiny percentage of us became unimaginably wealthy, profiting from the control over and abuse of the resources they had nothing to do with creating. At the same time, a majority of people worldwide are living amidst increased inequality, poverty, hunger, homelessness, and lack of potable water. These injustices are all casualties of the unjust acquisition, extraction, distribution, and profit from the energy stored under our feet. Let me share some details about the urgency of our peril. For the past 2 summers, regions as far as 70 miles above the Arctic Circle were overcome by daytime highs of over 50 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, hitting an all-time high above the Arctic Circle of 118 degrees. And a year ago, places in the Antarctic were over 70 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. We now know that air pollution caused by the burning of fossil fuel kills almost 9 million people every year. That's more than malaria, HIV/AIDS, and tuberculosis combined. And that doesn't even include the lives lost due to the impact of increased global warming. A 2021 study reports that should global warming exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius, the world's tropics, right around the equator there, the world's tropics could become uninhabitable. Many climate scientists believe we will cross that threshold in the next 10 years. Imagine what life will be like with 2.5 billion refugees. In other words, the past decade has been the hottest decade since records have been kept, and the past decade will be the coolest decade your children and grandchildren will ever experience. It's not only heat. Last August, unprecedented monsoons flooded 1/3 of Pakistan, killing over 1,600 people and displacing 30 million others. And between mid-July and mid-August, 5 states here in the US experienced 1 in 1,000 year rain events. Imagine 9 months of rain in a single day. It's not just the deluge, it's also the drought. That's why we call it climate chaos. Europe's drought is the worst it's been in 500 years. According to climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe, who also happens to be an evangelical Christian, over the past year, at least 1 in 3 Americans were personally affected by the way that climate change is making our extreme weather more severe. So, what's been keeping us from taking action? The driving reason is simple. Since their inception, fossil fuel corporations have had one and only one goal: to make the most money for their shareholders each quarter. Consider this. In 1975, when fossil fuel corporations heard that the world was on the brink of global warming, they quickly hired the best climate scientists in the world. As early as 1977, those scientists told the board of Exxon that climate change is caused by humans burning fossil fuel. It's getting worse. And while the oceans are absorbing most of that CO2, that will not continue indefinitely. A new study shows that as far back as 1977, oil companies knew precisely the global warming impacts we now see today. But instead of releasing those reports, Exxon hired the best ocean scientists and asked them if the oceans were in fact saving us. And in the mid-1980s, those ocean scientists confirmed those findings. At about the same time, Exxon's civil engineers reported a breakthrough in the ability to drill horizontally into oil shale, what we today refer to as fracking. So, what did Exxon do? First, they fired those climate scientists and buried their reports. And then Exxon hired a few fake scientists, the same fake scientists that the tobacco industry had hired in the 1970s. Just as these fake scientists had sown the seeds of doubt about whether smoking caused cancer, they began to sow the seeds of doubt about whether climate change was real. Over the past 4.5 decades, fossil fuel corporations and their think tank partners have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on various disinformation campaigns and supporting politicians who will do their bidding. To this day, America remains the only place in the world where climate denial has any political or cultural traction. Thank God That's not all there is to the story we find ourselves in today. Of course, there's the climate movement, and I'll have more to say about that in a minute. But what needs to be said is that since 1965, when President Johnson received the first report on global warming, scientists and engineers have done their jobs. They are providing all the solutions we need to complete the greatest transition humanity has ever attempted, moving from our dependence on fossil fuel to a reliance on renewable and sustainable clean forms of energy. A group of the world's top climate scientists recently issued a report indicating that by 2030, electricity from solar, wind, and water could provide all the electricity the world needs. And by 2035, renewable energy could also be the sole source of energy for all the world's heating, cooling, transportation, and industry. Furthermore, another new study indicates that making this transition will pay for itself in only 6 years. Not only that, but as we make this transition, we can address the economic and racial inequities. And by doing so, we will reap benefits far greater than the costs. Okay, that's the story. Now I want to invite you, as Christians, as people of faith, to receive this story using a familiar frame of reference. Just as Jesus, before he was killed, told his disciples that they would do even greater acts than he, God is calling us to restore God's great gift of creation, to remove the millstones that now hang around the necks of our children and grandchildren, and to hasten a just transformation to a sustainable economy that recognizes the interdependence of all creation. And just as Jesus called his disciples into the upper room, where they would join their hearts together in a final meal, while they confronted their fears and conjured the courage to face unimaginable events that were imminent, and then turn the world upside down. So too, God is calling you and me, our generation, to join our hearts together while we embrace the opportunity to overturn a destructive story of rugged individualism, exploitation, anthropocentrism, racist inequity, colonialist extraction, and environmental degradation. And in its place, create a new understanding of interdependence, resilience, wonder, moral imagination, moderation, justice, and vision. Keeping this frame of reference in mind, I want to offer an understanding of the kind of hope I believe people of faith are called to embrace, living as we are on the hinge of history amidst the sixth great extinction. I believe that truth is the foundation of hope. For hope to be authentic, it must be founded on truth. If we place our hope in something untrue, we eventually realize it's a false hope. To put it another way, facing reality is a precondition of hope. Dr. Jerome Groopman says it well. Hope, unlike optimism, is rooted in unalloyed reality. He continues, to hope under the most extreme circumstances is an act of defiance. Because I believe that hope is the most important contribution people of faith can and must make as humanity confronts the climate crisis. It's critically important for us as people of faith to stare reality in the face. We must be willing to face not only the scientific reality of a rapidly warming world, but also the political reality that there are individuals, groups, and entire industries devoted to spreading misinformation and lies about the climate crisis. If hope is essential to Christians, then exposing lies perpetuated by the powers and principalities that deny climate change must become a first-order priority. Christians cannot stand idly by and allow the greatest moral challenge humanity has ever faced to be framed as an ideological dispute by people with unlimited financial resources acquired by the abuse of God's creation. And so if we are to embrace an authentic hope, there are a few truths every congregation must be aware of. Truth number one: since the Paris Climate Agreement in late 2015, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America have lent over $1 trillion to fossil fuel companies to expand their oil, coal, and gas reserves and build new fossil fuel infrastructure. Truth number two: as I pointed out a moment ago, the world has no need for more fossil fuel. Energy from solar, wind, and water is now cheaper than energy from fossil fuel. Truth number three: if our world is to remain livable, if we are to keep the increase in global temperature to below 2 degrees Celsius, the fossil fuel companies will need to walk away from assets worth approximately $100 trillion. These and other truths must not be hung from the scaffold. They must be proclaimed from thousands of pulpits. Only then can hope take hold. Once we accept that truth is the foundation of hope, it follows, as Greta Thunberg reminds us, that hope starts with honesty. And if we are honest about the climate crisis, we will acknowledge that our hearts are full of grief. Many of us feel dread about what may lie ahead, outrage at what is happening to our planet, and sadness about what already has been lost. Too often, many of us keep these feelings to ourselves while we suffer in isolation. But it turns out that one of the central ministries of the church, the synagogue and the mosque, is to welcome people who are grieving, to hear them out, and to respond to their pain. My years as a pastor and my reading of Scripture have taught me that, in fact, honest expression of grief, the grief we experience, however overwhelming it may feel, is a precondition of hope. Let's make sure that our houses of worship are safe enough places for us to honestly share our grief, and by doing so, give rise to a life of hope and action. Now, before we move on from grief to a life of hope and action, I have one more brief observation to make. It's my experience that the smoke of grief and the fire of love are inseparable. And love fuels hope. I want to encourage you every single day, perhaps multiple times each day, to take a deep breath and allow love to inhabit your heart. Love experienced as gratitude for the beauty, the diversity, the grandeur that surround you. And then allow the fire of that love to cast out fear and propel you into action. We've all heard the expression, keep hope alive. Hope is kept alive by action. In her first public speech, a 2018 TEDx talk in Stockholm, 15-year-old Greta Thunberg, yes, a 15-year-old giving a TED talk, hard to imagine. She said, once we start to act, hope is everywhere. No one imagined, least of all Greta, that over the next 5 years, over 18 million young people from 233 countries would walk out of school into the streets of over 8,000 cities and towns. These young people understand hope as engagement. For them, hope has no connection with optimism. They realize they can't control the menacing juggernaut of the climate crisis. For them, hope is not focused on a future state of affairs. Hope is manifest right now by refusing to be paralyzed by despair, by no longer eating meat, by choosing not to fly, by confronting those in charge. In 2012, the climate movement began to call for divestment from fossil fuel corporations. In 2013, our denomination, the United Church of Christ, led the way in this effort. When the UCC passed a resolution that I wrote, we became the first religious body and the first national organization to vote to divest. No one imagined, least of all Bill McKibben or me, that in only 10 years' time, portfolios worth over $40 trillion would purge their portfolios of their holdings of fossil fuel stocks. In November 2018, 250 young people filled Nancy Pelosi's office, and they refused to leave. Alongside them offering support was then 29-year-old Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Knowing that Pelosi would soon become Speaker of the House, they were demanding that Congress pass some version of the Green New Deal and focus on environmental justice. Although the police arrested 51 of them, Pelosi welcomed the protest and called on the police, and I'm quoting now, to allow them to continue to organize and participate in our democracy. Quite a contrast from current events. In support of their action, in 2019, the UCC General Synod became the first Christian denomination to endorse the Green New Deal. No one imagined, least of all these young climate leaders, that in September 2022, they would be among the honored guests on the lawn of the White House, celebrating the signing of the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes over $370 billion of climate and energy related projects, by far the biggest commitment our country or any country has ever made to the climate crisis. In 2021, Bill McKibben launched a new climate organization called Third Act. It provides elders, people over 60 in their third act of life, with an opportunity to join millions of others as they realign their time, their energy, their gifts, their attention, and their assets to respond to the call now heard round the world. Bill reminded those elders that they hold about 70% of all the assets, in the United States. And then he invited them to tell their banks to stop investing in fossil fuel projects. No one imagined that on March 21st, a month ago, thousands of gray hairs would protest in front of over 100 bank locations to cut up their credit cards and tell the world that altogether, in the last 6 years since the Paris Climate Agreement, the 60 largest banks in the world have poured over $4.6 trillion into the fossil fuel industry. We can't accept God's invitation to help create a news story unless we are willing to take action. Let us become partners with God as we explore new and perhaps unfamiliar pathways, and let our actions be guided by a preferred future that embraces resilience in place of growth, collaboration in place of consumption, wisdom in place of progress, balance in place of addiction, moderation in place of excess, vision in place of convenience, accountability in place of disregard, and self-giving love in place of self-centered fear. God has given us everything we need to cross the abyss between our current story and the new story that God is calling us to champion. Humanity has all the technology we need to immediately transition to a fossil fuel-free economy. But to relinquish our dependence on fossil fuels requires us to expand our moral imagination so that we can extend the horizon of hope to embrace this new story. This may be the most essential work of the church, the synagogue, and the mosque in the climate crisis world. But expanding our moral imagination is not enough. As people of faith, it's time for us to make God's call to restore creation and advance climate justice an essential part of our identity, every much as prayer is an essential part of our identity. The God of many names is calling everyone who is alive today to recognize that our generation, no matter what generation you may be part of, our generation has a vocation, a common universal calling. This is our Easter witness. This is our Pentecost commission. Believing that another more just world is possible, let us become the generation that finally blows the whistle and declares, "Not on my watch." Let us begin to live into a new story, a story that will leave a fair and stable planet for our kids and grandkids and all future generations, a story shaped by the unifying power of shared vulnerability, the emerging embrace of the challenge of change, the humbling reward of justice restored, the expansive fullness of interdependence, the contagious generosity of caring for the least of these among us, and our universal calling to protect God's great gift of creation. Thank you, and let the people say, Amen. Amen.